Funny, Ryan Whitmore said, lifting his champagne glass just high enough for the diamonds on Madison's hand to catch the light. The last time I saw those hands, they were signing divorce papers. Still empty, I see. For one small second, the room seemed to forget how to breathe. The charity auction had been humming with polished laughter, silver forks against porcelain plates, and the soft click of designer heels across the marble floor of the Manhattan Grand Hotel. Crystal chandeliers hung above the ballroom like frozen rain, throwing gold across black tuxedos and silk gowns, across wrists heavy with bracelets and fingers crowned with stones large enough to buy a house in some quiet town 1,000 miles away. Emily Carter stood near the registration table with nothing on her hands but pale skin, clean nails, and the faintest white line where her wedding ring had once lived. She wore a simple ivory dress, not new, not loud, pressed carefully enough to tell anyone who looked closely that she still believed in dignity even when no one was offering it to her. She had come alone. No husband beside her, no assistant behind her, no necklace at her throat to explain why she had been allowed into a room where every invitation was measured in money, family names, and favors owed. Ryan noticed all of that before he noticed her face. He always had. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country below. And if you believe dignity is the strongest revenge, hit like and subscribe. Now, back to her story. Ryan smiled as if he had made a harmless joke, the kind wealthy men used when they wanted cruelty to arrive dressed as charm. A few people around him laughed into their glasses. Not loudly. That would have been too honest. They gave the kind of soft, careful laughter that belongs to ballrooms and country clubs. Laughter that lets a woman know she has been placed beneath the table without anyone needing to raise their voice. Madison Vale, Ryan's fiancée, tilted her hand slightly so her engagement ring flashed under the chandelier, a 6-carat oval diamond set so high it looked almost theatrical. She glanced at Emily's bare fingers and gave a smile made of sugar and ice. "Oh, Emily," she said, gentle enough for strangers to mistake it for kindness. "I hope one day someone gives you something beautiful too." Emily did not look at the ring. She looked at the way Madison's fingers tightened around Ryan's sleeve, as if beauty had to be guarded to remain hers. Then Emily looked down at her own hands. 5 years ago, those hands had packed Ryan's lunches in brown paper bags when his first office was a rented room above a dry cleaner in Queens. Those hands had stayed up past 2 a.m. correcting investor decks while Ryan slept on the couch with his tie still on. Those hands had sold her mother's small pearl earrings to cover payroll when his first client delayed payment. And those same hands had signed the divorce papers after Ryan told her, in a kitchen colder than January, that she was a reminder of the life he had outgrown. Tonight, under $500,000 of chandelier light, those hands rested quietly at her sides. No trembling, no reaching, no begging to be understood. Ryan waited for her to flinch. That was the part he had expected. A lowered chin, a wounded smile, maybe a whispered excuse before she disappeared toward the coat check. But Emily only placed her fingertips on the edge of the registration table, feeling the smooth linen beneath them, and lifted her eyes to his. The silence in her gaze was not weak. It was patient. It had survived moving boxes, unanswered calls, grocery receipts folded into a wallet, and winter mornings when she warmed her hands around gas station coffee before opening the jewelry shop where she worked. Ryan's smile thinned. For the first time that evening, his joke did not land where he wanted it to. The auctioneer's bell chimed from the stage, calling guests toward their seats. Around them, the room began to move again, silk brushing against wool, perfume mixing with the scent of roses and polished wood. Madison laughed softly and turned away first, pulling Ryan with her, but Emily heard his final remark drift over his shoulder like smoke. "Some women leave with diamonds," he said. "Some leave with lessons." Emily closed her fingers once, slowly, then opened them. Again, empty, he had called them. But he had no idea what those hands had learned to build after letting him go. Emily did not follow Ryan and Madison toward the front tables. She waited until the crowd thinned, then walked to the far side of the ballroom, where the tall windows faced Fifth Avenue and the city lights shimmered through the glass like distant jewelry no one could own. Outside, yellow cabs moved in thin rivers below. Inside, waiters in white gloves crossed the marble floor with trays of champagne, and every laugh sounded rehearsed, polished, expensive. Emily kept her hands folded in front of her, not to hide them, but to steady the memory rising from beneath her skin. The ring she had lost had not been the true loss. The true loss had happened quietly, long before the divorce papers, in the small disappearances no one else could see. It had been Ryan pulling his hand away when photographers asked them to stand closer at his first company dinner. It had been his new friends calling her sweet in the same tone people used for furniture they planned to replace. It had been the night he stood in their kitchen, wearing a navy suit she had picked up from the cleaners that morning, and told her he needed a wife who understood the world he was entering. Emily had looked down then, too. Her wedding ring had sat on her finger under the cold kitchen light, simple and thin, bought when they still counted every dollar. She remembered twisting it once, not because it was loose, but because the room suddenly felt too small for the life she had given away. Ryan had not shouted. That would have made the cruelty easier to name. He had spoken gently, almost sadly, as if leaving her behind was a promotion he wished she could celebrate. He kept the penthouse, the company shares, the lake house they had only visited twice, and most of the people who had once called themselves their friends. Emily kept 3 boxes of clothes, a cracked ceramic mug from their first apartment, and a sketchbook she had nearly thrown away. On the morning she left, snow was falling over Manhattan in soft, clean pieces. She had stood in the lobby with 1 suitcase and no car waiting, while the doorman avoided her eyes because kindness would have made both of them uncomfortable. Her left hand had felt strangely light without the ring, as if some invisible weight had been removed and replaced with cold air. In the cab, she opened the sketchbook on her lap. Between grocery lists and old appointment reminders were drawings she had made during the years when Ryan thought she was merely sitting beside him at meetings, quiet and decorative. Rings shaped like broken circles, bracelets inspired by window frost, pendants built around empty spaces, because Emily had always believed absence could have architecture. She did not know then that those pages would become a map. She only knew she could not let Ryan be the final person to decide what her hands were worth. Back in the ballroom, the auctioneer announced the first lot, and applause traveled across the room like rain tapping glass. Emily turned from the window. Across the aisle, Madison lifted her hand again, letting her diamond answer every camera. Ryan leaned close to say something that made her smile. They looked perfect from a distance, the kind of couple magazines loved because distance forgave almost everything. Emily walked toward her assigned seat near the back, but before she reached it, a woman in a black evening dress glanced at her name card and frowned. "Are you sure you are in the right section?" the woman asked, lowering her voice just enough to pretend it was polite. Emily looked at the card, then at the row of chairs reserved for smaller donors, assistants, guests someone had forgotten to place properly. Her name was printed in silver ink. Emily Carter. No title, no company, no husband attached. "Yes," Emily said, and her voice was calm enough to surprise even herself. She sat down, placed her small clutch on her lap, and rested both hands on top of it. They were bare beneath the chandelier light, but they were not ashamed. At the front of the room, Ryan glanced back and caught sight of her seated alone. He smiled again, slower this time, as if the distance between his table and hers proved everything he believed. Emily did not smile back. She simply opened her clutch, touched the edge of the folded invitation inside, and felt the hidden weight of a second card beneath it. One printed on thick black paper with the name Brooks and Vale embossed so deeply her fingertips could feel every letter. The second card inside Emily's clutch did not belong to the charity auction. It was smaller, heavier, and so black it seemed to drink in the chandelier light instead of reflecting it. Brooks and Vale was embossed across the front in quiet silver letters, and beneath it, in handwriting Emily recognized from only 3 notes in her life, were 7 words. When they looked down, "Keep walking forward." She had read that sentence twice in the cab before arriving, then slipped the card behind her invitation like a secret she was not ready to hold in public. Now, with Ryan smiling from the front of the ballroom and Madison sparkling beneath every camera, Emily pressed her thumb against the edge of that card and remembered the night it had begun. It had been raining hard in Brooklyn, the kind of late November rain that turned sidewalks black and made storefront windows blur into watercolor. The little jewelry repair shop where Emily worked was 10 minutes from closing. Her feet hurt from standing behind glass cases all day, and her hands smelled faintly of polishing cloth, lemon cleaner, and warm metal. She had been resetting price tags when the bell over the door rang. A tall man in a charcoal overcoat stepped inside, carrying no umbrella, his silver hair damp at the temples, his expression calm in a way that made the small shop feel suddenly quieter. He placed an old ring on the counter, not a showy one, but beautifully made, with a cracked setting around a pale blue stone. "Can it be saved?" he asked. Emily did not ask what it was worth. She did not ask who had owned it. She lifted it carefully under the lamp and turned it between her fingers, studying the tiny fracture near the prong. "Yes," she said after a moment, but not by forcing it back into the shape it had before. The man looked at her then, really looked, as if her answer had repaired something other than jewelry. While the shop owner was in the back, Emily sketched a new support for the stone on a scrap of brown wrapping paper. She drew quickly, not trying to impress anyone, just letting the lines become what they needed to become. A curve where pressure had once been. A hidden bridge beneath the setting. Space left open so the light could pass through the damage instead of pretending it had never happened. The man watched without interrupting. When she finished, he touched the edge of the paper, not the ring. "Who taught you to see grief like that?" he asked. Emily almost smiled. No one had ever called her designs grief before. No one had ever understood them so quickly. "Life," she said, because it was safer than saying marriage, safer than saying divorce, safer than saying a man once made me feel like everything I gave him vanished because he stopped calling it valuable. The stranger paid for the repair in advance, left the ring, and took only the scrap drawing with him. 2 weeks later, Emily received a cream envelope at the shop addressed to her in that same careful handwriting. Inside was an invitation to meet with Nathaniel Brooks, founder of Brooks & Vale, one of the most private jewelry houses in America. Emily had sat on the subway for 6 stops before she realized she had been holding her breath. Back in the Manhattan ballroom, the first diamond necklace sold for more than her old apartment had cost for an entire year. Applause rose, clean and practiced. Emily stayed still, feeling that old rain-soaked evening fold itself into the present. Across the room, Ryan leaned toward a man in a gray tuxedo, smiling the smile he used when he wanted money to trust him. He did not know that Brooks & Vale was the investor he had been trying to reach for months. He did not know that the woman he had left near the back of the room had once been invited through a door he could not open. Madison turned in her chair and looked at Emily again, this time with a small, curious frown, as if trying to understand why humiliation had not made her disappear. Emily lowered her eyes to her hands. They were still bare, still quiet. But under the smooth black card, beneath the ivory clutch on her lap, those hands carried the memory of every line they had drawn in secret, every stone they had set beneath harsh shop lights, every broken thing they had learned could be remade without becoming less beautiful. When the auctioneer announced there would be a special presentation after the 3rd lot, Emily felt the room shift before anyone else did. Somewhere above the balcony, behind the velvet curtain and the gold rail, Nathaniel Brooks was already watching. After the 3rd lot was announced, Emily stopped listening to the numbers. The auctioneer's voice rose and fell like music from another room, but her mind had already drifted back to the winter after the divorce, to the 4th-floor walk-up in Brooklyn where the radiator knocked at night and the windows wore a thin lace of frost every morning. The apartment had been so small that she could reach the kitchen counter from the edge of her bed, and for the first month, she owned only 1 chair. She used it for dinner, for sketching, for folding laundry, and sometimes for sitting in silence with her coat still on because turning on the heat felt like a luxury she had not earned yet. There had been no dramatic beginning to her new life. No sudden transformation. No music swelling behind her. Only a woman waking before sunrise, pulling her hair into a low knot, and walking 6 blocks through cold air to catch the train. At the jewelry repair shop, she cleaned glass cases until every fingerprint disappeared. She wrapped purchases for women who never looked at price tags. She smiled when customers asked if she was the owner and kept smiling when the owner answered for her. During lunch breaks, she ate soup from a paper cup in the back room and studied gemology videos on her phone with the volume low. At night, when her feet ached and the city outside her window turned blue with winter, she sat under a cheap desk lamp and practiced setting stones into wax molds until her fingers stiffened. Those hands Ryan had called empty began to change in small, private ways. The skin near her thumbs grew rough from polishing wheels. A faint line appeared where tweezers pressed too long. Her nails stayed short, not because she no longer cared about beauty, but because she had learned beauty could also be practical, patient, and covered in silver dust. She kept a jar on her windowsill filled with broken clasps, discarded chains, and tiny flawed stones the shop owner allowed her to take home. To anyone else, it looked like junk. To Emily, it looked like proof that damaged things still had structure. She drew rings shaped around absence, necklaces that left space at the center, bracelets with hidden supports beneath delicate surfaces. She named none of them at first. Naming felt too bold. She simply drew, erased, redrew, and let the work become a language no one could interrupt. Some nights, the loneliness pressed against the walls so heavily that she had to stand and open the window, letting 20-degree air rush into the room just to remind herself she could still choose what entered her life. She missed certain versions of Ryan then, not the man in the ballroom, not the man who learned to smile with cruelty, but the younger one who once fell asleep with unpaid bills on his chest and her hand resting over his heartbeat. Grief did not disappear just because someone had failed her. It only changed shape. Emily learned to set it down beside the tools, to let it sit there while she worked. Month by month, the sketches improved. Her lines became cleaner. Her settings became braver. The first time a customer chose one of her repaired vintage rings over a new designer piece, Emily went home and cried quietly into a dish towel, not from sadness, but from the shock of being seen. That was before Nathaniel Brooks, before the black card, before the ballroom, before Ryan looked back from a front table and mistook distance for defeat. In the present, applause pulled Emily back into the Manhattan Grand. Madison was whispering to Ryan, her diamond moving like a small spotlight with every gesture. Emily looked down at her own hands resting on the ivory clutch. The rough places were still there, softened beneath lotion, but not erased. She was grateful they had not vanished. They were her witnesses. They remembered the stairs, the train rides, the cracked mug of coffee at midnight, the first sketch taped above her bed, the morning she woke and realized she had gone an entire day, without wondering whether Ryan regretted leaving. The auctioneer's bell chimed again. A hush moved across the room, different this time, heavier, expectant. The lights near the stage dimmed by a shade. Velvet curtains stirred at the far end of the ballroom. Emily felt the black card inside her clutch like a pulse against her palm. She did not know exactly what Nathaniel Brooks planned to say tonight. He had only told her that truth had better timing than revenge. Across the room, Ryan adjusted his cuff links, unaware that the winter he had never cared to ask about was about to step into the light. The hush that moved through the ballroom did not frighten Emily. It reminded her of the jewelry shop after closing, when the front door was locked, the display lights were dimmed, and the world finally became quiet enough for small things to be heard. That was where Nathaniel Brooks had returned 3 weeks after the rainy night. Not with an assistant, not with cameras, not with the polished distance of a billionaire used to being recognized, but alone, carrying the repaired ring in a navy velvet box. Emily had been cleaning the counter when he stepped inside, and for a moment, she thought he had come to complain. Instead, he opened the box beneath the lamp and studied the pale blue stone now held by the hidden bridge she had designed. Light slipped through the space beneath it, soft and clear, making the old fracture look less like damage and more like history. "You did not hide the break," he said. Emily wiped her hands on a cloth, suddenly aware of the silver dust beneath her nails. "It would have weakened the setting," she answered. "Some things need support, not pretending." Nathaniel looked at her then with that same quiet attention that made ordinary sentences feel like doors. He did not offer sympathy. He did not ask personal questions. He only placed the scrap of brown wrapping paper beside the ring. Her sketch had been preserved in a clear sleeve, the torn edge still uneven. "I have spent 30 years watching people decorate emptiness," he said. "You seem to understand how to give it shape." Emily did not know how to respond to that. Compliments had become difficult after Ryan, because praise from him had always arrived with conditions hidden underneath. But Nathaniel's words did not reach for ownership. They simply landed on the counter and waited. He asked to see more of her work. Emily almost said she had none. Then she thought of the shoebox beneath her bed, full of folded pages and late-night drawings, and felt the old instinct to make herself smaller press against her ribs. Instead, she unlocked the bottom drawer and took out 3 sketches she had brought to work that morning. Her fingers shook once as she spread them across the glass. Nathaniel studied them without touching. A bracelet shaped like 2 open palms. A pendant built around a hollow center. A ring with a missing curve that somehow looked complete because the empty space had been intentional. Outside, traffic hissed over wet pavement. Inside, the little shop smelled of metal polish and winter coats. "This is not repair work," he said at last. "This is a collection." Emily gave a small breath that was almost a laugh. Collections need names, money, factories, people who know what they are doing. "No," Nathaniel said. "They need a reason to exist." That sentence followed her home that night. It sat beside her on the train, climbed 4 flights of stairs with her, and stayed awake while she made tea in her tiny kitchen. 2 days later, a formal proposal arrived from Brooks & Vale, offering studio access, materials, mentorship, and full creative credit. Emily read the words "full creative credit" 4 times before she trusted them. No one had given her credit when Ryan's first investor signed because of the pitch deck she had rebuilt. No one had mentioned her name when his company survived because she found the accounting error that would have cost him his launch. But here, on thick paper with silver lettering, someone was offering to put her name beside her own work. Over the following months, Emily entered the Brooks & Vale studio before sunrise and often left after the cleaning staff had finished the halls. The studio was not loud. It was all controlled light, velvet trays, magnifying lenses, and the low murmur of artisans who understood that beauty could not be rushed. Nathaniel never hovered. He appeared sometimes at the edge of the room, asked one exact question, then left her with the answer she had not known she was ready to find. The collection grew slowly. A cuff bracelet inspired by hands opening after years of being clenched. Earrings shaped like falling ice, because winter had taught her endurance. A diamond collar with a deliberate space at the throat, because Emily refused to design anything that mistook possession for love. She called it the Empty Hands collection only after the final piece was finished. Nathaniel had not smiled widely when she told him, but his eyes warmed. "Then we will let the name speak for itself," he said. Now, in the ballroom, as the stage lights dimmed and the velvet curtains stirred, Emily understood what he had meant. At the front table, Ryan was laughing with a potential investor, still unaware that the collection he hoped to impress tonight had passed through the hands he mocked. Madison adjusted her diamond ring, checking its reflection in the dark screen of her phone. Emily sat still near the back, her ivory clutch resting on her lap, the black card hidden beneath her palm. She did not need to announce herself. Somewhere behind the curtain, under guarded lights and white gloves, her work was waiting to enter the room. The velvet curtains did not open all at once. They parted slowly, almost ceremonially, as if the room was being asked to lower its voice before it was allowed to see what waited behind them. A narrow line of white light spilled across the stage first, then widened over a series of black pedestals arranged in a gentle curve. Each pedestal held a glass case. Inside each case, something bright rested against dark velvet, not flashing wildly like Madison's ring, not shouting for attention, but glowing with the calm certainty of things made by hands that understood restraint. The auctioneer stepped aside, and a woman from Brooks & Vale approached the microphone. Emily recognized her as Claire Bennett, the director of exhibitions, a woman who measured every word as carefully as diamonds. "Ladies and gentlemen," Claire said, her voice smooth across the ballroom, "before our final private lots, Brooks & Vale is honored to present a new collection created in partnership with this year's Charitable Arts Fund." A murmur moved through the room. Ryan leaned forward. Madison stopped looking at her phone. Investors at the front tables adjusted in their chairs with the alert posture of people who knew that a Brooks & Vale presentation could change the direction of money before dessert was served. Emily felt her breath slow. She had known the collection would be shown tonight, but knowing was different from watching it appear beneath chandeliers while the man who had once dismissed her sat 20 yards away, polished, confident, and unprepared. The first case illuminated. On the screen behind the stage, a bracelet appeared in close detail, 2 open forms curving toward each other without touching. Diamonds followed the lines like drops of frozen morning light. Claire spoke of negative space, structural grace, and the beauty of what remains open. Emily did not hear every word. She was looking at the hidden support beneath the cuff, The tiny bridge no one in the audience would notice unless they understood how easily delicate things collapsed without it. She remembered filing that bridge at 2 in the morning while rain tapped the studio windows and Nathaniel Brooks stood across the room saying nothing, because silence from him had never felt like judgment. The second piece appeared, a necklace built around an empty center, its diamonds set along the edge as if honoring the space instead of filling it. Madison whispered something to Ryan, but he did not answer. His eyes were fixed on the screen now. Emily saw the moment recognition brushed against him, not fully, not yet, but enough to disturb the arrogance in his face. He had seen sketches like that before, years ago, on napkins beside unpaid bills, in the margins of his business plans, on the back of envelopes he had tossed aside without reading. Claire continued. This collection explores the dignity of rebuilding. It asks what hands carry after loss, and what they are capable of creating when no one is watching. At the word hands, several people glanced down. At their own jewelry. Emily kept hers still on her clutch. The black card beneath her palm felt warm now. Ryan turned slightly, searching the back rows until he found her. For the first time that night, he did not smile. He studied her bare fingers as if they had become a language he suddenly feared he could no longer read. Madison noticed his attention and followed it. Her expression tightened, not with jealousy, but with confusion. Emily gave them nothing to hold. No triumphant look. No raised eyebrow. No performance of surprise. She simply sat there, shoulders relaxed, eyes forward, as the third case lit up and the room exhaled softly. It was the central bracelet, the one Nathaniel had called the spine of the collection. White diamonds were set in a pattern that looked almost like fingertips opening from darkness into light. Emily had designed it after waking one morning in her small apartment and realizing her hands no longer reached for the missing ring. They reached for pencils, tools, coffee, keys, doorways, freedom. On stage, Claire paused long enough for the cameras to find the piece. This final design, she said, will be presented by Mr. Nathaniel Brooks himself. A different silence fell then. Not polite, not bored, alive. From the balcony stairs, Nathaniel appeared in a midnight tuxedo, his silver hair catching the light, his face composed in the way powerful men looked when they did not need to prove power. Ryan straightened so quickly his chair shifted against the floor. Emily saw his hand move toward his cuff links, that nervous habit he thought no one remembered. Nathaniel descended the steps without looking at the front tables. He walked past donors, photographers, and investors, carrying a long black velvet box in both hands. Every head turned with him. Madison's diamond ring dimmed under the shadow of his passing. Ryan's lips parted slightly when he realized Nathaniel was not walking to the stage. He was walking toward the back of the ballroom, toward Emily. She stood only when he reached her row, not because she had been summoned, but because some moments deserved to be met on both feet. Nathaniel stopped before her and opened the velvet box. The diamonds inside did not look cold. They looked like captured dawn. He did not touch her quickly. He offered his hand, and Emily placed hers in it with the quiet trust of a woman who had learned the difference between being taken and being honored. Around them, the entire room held still. Ryan was watching. Madison was watching. Every person who had laughed earlier was watching. Nathaniel lifted Emily's bare hand gently into the light, and the ballroom that had mocked its emptiness waited for the truth to arrive. Nathaniel Brooks held Emily's hand beneath the chandelier light with the kind of care that made the room understand this was not theater. It was testimony. He removed the bracelet from its velvet bed slowly, allowing the diamonds to catch the white stage glow one by one. The piece was not heavy in appearance, yet every eye followed it as if it carried the weight of the entire evening. Emily felt the cool metal touch her wrist, then settle there with perfect balance, the hidden clasp closing so softly that only she heard it. Around her, no one moved. Even the waiters along the wall stood still with silver trays paused at waist height. Nathaniel did not raise his voice. He did not need to. This design is called First Light, he said, looking not at the audience, but at Emily's hands. It was created for every person who has been told that losing everything made them less. A low murmur traveled through the ballroom, then faded beneath the force of his calm. Emily's wrist glowed under the chandelier, not in the loud way of wealth, but like something found after a long winter and brought carefully into morning. Ryan stood from his table before he seemed to realize he had done it. His chair scraped lightly against the marble floor, a small sound that cut through the silence more sharply than any shout could have. Madison touched his sleeve, but he did not look at her. His face had changed. The practiced charm was gone, replaced by an expression Emily knew from years ago, from nights when an investor asked a question he could not answer, and he searched the room for her before remembering he was supposed to look brilliant alone. "Nathaniel," Ryan said, forcing a laugh that arrived thin and late. "I had no idea you knew Emily." Several heads turned toward him. Nathaniel finally looked up. His expression remained courteous, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop by several degrees. "Mr. Whitmore," he said, "I know Miss Carter through her work." Her work. Not his wife. Not his ex-wife. Not the woman at the back table. Her work. Emily felt the words rest gently where the bracelet had closed. Ryan's mouth tightened. He looked from Nathaniel to the screen, where the magnified sketch of First Light still glowed behind the stage. There, beneath the drawing, the signature Emily Carter appeared in elegant black script. A camera flash went off. Then another. Madison saw the signature and slowly withdrew her hand from Ryan's arm. She stared at the screen, then at Emily, then at the ring on her own finger, as if its brightness had suddenly become a question. Ryan tried to recover. Men like him were trained to turn embarrassment into conversation. "Of course," he said, smoothing the front of his tuxedo. "Emily always had little hobbies. I am glad she found something meaningful." The sentence hung in the air, dressed as praise, but smelling faintly of the old cruelty. Emily did not answer. She did not need to. Nathaniel closed the empty velvet box and passed it to an attendant without taking his eyes off Ryan. "A hobby does not anchor a collection expected to raise $8 million tonight," he said. The number moved through the ballroom like a door opening in every mind at once. $8 million. Emily heard a woman near the aisle inhale softly. One of Ryan's investors leaned toward another and whispered behind his program. Madison's posture became very still. Ryan blinked, and in that single blink, Emily saw him recalculating her, trying to move her from the column of what he had discarded into the column of what he might have underestimated. But some losses could not be bought back with sudden respect. Nathaniel turned to the room. Ms. Carter developed the central architecture of this collection from sketches she began years before Brooks and Vail ever saw them. Tonight, we are not placing diamonds on empty hands. We are placing light where the world failed to look. Applause did not burst at first. It began with one pair of hands, somewhere near the back. Then another. Then the sound grew, round and full, rising past the tables, past the chandeliers, past the frozen smile Ryan could no longer hold. Emily stood in the middle of it, her wrist shining, her fingers relaxed, her face quiet. She thought of the brown paper sketch in the Brooklyn shop, the cracked blue ring, the fourth-floor stairs, the morning she had carried coffee in both hands because there had been no one else to carry anything for her. Ryan looked as if he wanted to speak again, but no sentence could reach her now without crossing everything he had refused to see. Nathaniel stepped slightly aside, not in front of her, not shielding her, simply making space. And for the first time that night, the room did not see Emily as someone who had arrived alone. They saw her as someone who had arrived whole. The applause became the sound Ryan could not control. It filled the Manhattan Grand Hotel from the marble floor to the painted ceiling, washing over the tables where his investors sat with their programs half-folded and their expressions newly careful. Emily did not raise her chin higher than before. She did not turn toward Ryan to watch him shrink beneath the attention he had once believed belonged only to him. She simply stood beside Nathaniel Brooks with the bracelet resting against her wrist like mourning after a long storm. On the screen behind them, the collection images shifted one by one. The open-palmed cuff, the hollow-centered necklace, the earrings shaped like falling ice, the first sketches rendered in pencil, then the finished diamonds turning beneath studio lights. Beneath each image appeared her name. Emily Carter. Not Mrs. Whitmore. Not Ryan's ex-wife. Not the woman who left with nothing. Emily Carter. The letters were clean, black, and impossible to soften into someone else's story. Ryan tried to clap. Emily saw the motion from the corner of her eye, stiff and late, his hands meeting without sound because no one beside him was pretending anymore. The man in the gray tuxedo who had been speaking with him all night leaned away slightly and checked his phone. Another investor, a woman from Chicago with a sharp bob and a sharper reputation, whispered something to her assistant, who immediately closed the folder bearing Ryan's company logo. It was not dramatic. That was what made it final. Doors did not slam in rooms like this. Deals died behind polite eyes, behind unfinished champagne, behind the sudden absence of warmth from a handshake. Madison sat very still beside him, her diamond catching the chandelier with the same brilliance as before, but now its brightness seemed stranded. She looked at Ryan as if she had just discovered a room in his house that he had kept locked. "You knew she designed?" she asked quietly, but the microphone near the aisle carried just enough of her voice for nearby guests to hear. Ryan's smile twitched. "Madison, this is not the moment." "That was not my question," she said, even softer. Emily looked away, not from pity, but because Madison's disappointment belonged to Madison, not to her. Nathaniel turned back to the microphone after the applause settled into an attentive hush. "Tonight's proceeds from the central piece will establish the Carter Fellowship for Women Rebuilding Careers in Design After Financial or Personal Loss," he said. For the first time, Emily's composure nearly slipped. She had known about the presentation. She had known about the collection. She had not known about the fellowship. The bracelet on her wrist suddenly felt less like jewelry and more like a door being opened for women she would never meet. Women sitting in small apartments, holding old sketches, wondering whether the world had already decided their value. The bidding opened at $200,000. A paddle rose before the auctioneer finished the sentence. Then another from the center table. The numbers climbed with astonishing calm. 500,000, 800,000, 1.2 million. Each bid delivered with the quiet confidence of people who understood that this was no longer simply about diamonds. It was about being seen purchasing a story before everyone else realized its worth. Ryan remained standing too long, then sat down abruptly when Madison did not look at him. The investor from Chicago rose from her chair and crossed the aisle, not toward Ryan, but toward Emily. She waited until the auctioneer paused, then extended her hand with a small, respectful smile. "Ms. Carter," she said, "when you are ready, I would like to discuss a permanent installation in our Michigan Avenue flagship." Emily accepted the handshake. Her hand did not tremble. The diamonds at her wrist caught the woman's bracelet for a second, light answering light. Across the room, Ryan watched that handshake as if it were a contract being signed in a language he had refused to learn. Nathaniel stepped aside again, giving Emily the space to respond for herself. "I would be honored to talk after the auction," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried because the room had chosen to listen. The final bid closed at $2.4 million. The bell rang. Applause rose once more, but this time Emily heard something different inside it. Not rescue, not revenge, recognition. Ryan stood again as she returned to her seat, his face pale beneath the ballroom gold. "Emily," he said, just loud enough for her to hear as she passed the edge of his table. There was a question inside her name now, and perhaps an apology trying to find its way through pride. She paused, not because he deserved it, but because she no longer feared the sound of him. Madison stared down at her own hands. The investors looked elsewhere. Nathaniel waited a few steps behind, silent, allowing the moment to belong entirely to her. Emily turned her wrist once, watching the diamonds scatter light across her bare fingers. Then she looked at Ryan with the same quiet eyes he had mistaken for weakness at the beginning of the night. She said nothing. Not one sentence. Not one accusation. Not one reminder of what he had taken, what he had mocked, or what he had never bothered to see. Her silence did more than words could have done. It left him alone with the full shape of his mistake. Ryan said Emily's name once more, but this time it did not sound like ownership. It sounded like someone calling after a train that had already left the station. Emily stood at the edge of his table with the applause still fading behind her and the bracelet warm against her wrist from the heat of the lights. For a moment, she allowed herself to see him clearly, not as the man who had left her, not as the husband she had once defended to friends who saw his ambition turning sharp, but simply as a man seated beneath a chandelier, surrounded by everything he had chased, and suddenly unable to enjoy any of it. His tuxedo was perfect. His watch cost more than the first car they had ever shared. His table was close to the stage. And still, he looked smaller than he had looked in the kitchen years ago, when he told her she no longer fit his life. Madison rose quietly beside him, gathering her silver clutch from the table. She did not make a scene. She only removed her hand from the back of his chair and stepped away with the slow grace of a woman who had just understood that brilliance without character was only glare. The investors followed with softer exits. A closed folder, a polite nod, a sentence about speaking next week that everyone in the room knew meant not at all. Ryan watched them leave one by one, his face held in the careful stillness of a man trying not to lose dignity after spending years teaching others they had none. Emily could have said many things then. She could have reminded him of the nights she corrected his numbers until sunrise. She could have mentioned the pearls she sold, the rent she covered, the clients she calmed, the dreams she made smaller so his could look larger. She could have asked whether her hands still looked empty to him now, but the words rose only far enough for her to recognize them, then settled back into silence. She had not survived loneliness, winter, and rebuilding just to spend her finest hour explaining herself to the person who had needed her pain to feel powerful. Instead, she gave him the smallest nod, not forgiveness exactly, not cruelty either, just an ending. Then she turned away. Nathaniel was waiting near the aisle, not offering his arm until she reached him, not interrupting the moment she had chosen for herself. Outside the ballroom doors, the sound changed. The auction faded behind polished wood, replaced by the quieter world of the hotel corridor, where cream walls held framed photographs of old New York and the carpet softened every step. Emily exhaled for what felt like the first time all night. Her reflection moved beside her in the dark glass of a hallway mirror. Ivory dress, bare throat, diamond bracelet, calm eyes. She thought she might not recognize herself, but she did. She recognized the woman from the fourth-floor apartment. The woman on the subway with sketches folded in her purse. The woman who learned that being unseen was not the same as being worthless. Nathaniel walked beside her without speaking until they reached the lobby. Snow had begun to fall outside, thin and silver against the city windows. "You handled that with more grace than most people handle praise," he said. Emily looked down at the bracelet, at the diamonds resting where Ryan's words had tried to leave a stain. "I spent a long time thinking grace meant staying quiet because I had no power," she said. Tonight felt different. Nathaniel nodded. Tonight, quiet had a voice. A black car waited at the curb, its headlights glowing through the snowfall. Before the doorman opened the door, Emily paused and looked back through the lobby toward the ballroom. She could not see Ryan from there. Only the golden spill of light beneath closed doors, the distant shimmer of music, the faint echo of a world that had once measured her by who stood beside her. She lifted her hand slightly, not to admire the diamonds, but to feel the weight of what they represented. Not rescue, not replacement, recognition. Somewhere inside, the central piece had raised enough money to give other women studio keys, training hours, materials, and a name printed beside their own work. That mattered more than Ryan's regret. It mattered more than Madison's ring. It mattered more than every laugh that had tried to reduce her to absence. Emily stepped into the cold evening, and the snow touched her hair like quiet applause. Her hands were no longer hidden. They were open at her sides, carrying nothing that needed to be proven and everything she had become. She did not win him back. She won herself. And by the end of the night, everyone knew those hands had never been empty.